Hi Spicewood kiddos, it's Miss Rayborn here. We have been learning about architects for the last several weeks, and I'm really excited because we get to start a unit today on Egypt. We're going to talk a lot about the architecture of Egypt, so it was a great start for us, and I'm really looking forward to it. Today's book is called How the Sphinx Got to the Museum, and it's going to kind of explain to us how the artifacts of Egypt made their way into art museums so that we can learn about them. So it's called How the Sphinx Made It to the Museum by Jesse Hartland. It says, thousands of years ago, a pharaoh ruled Egypt. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual is that this pharaoh was a woman. Her name was Hatshepsut. Many monuments and pieces of art were created in her honor. There were statues, smooth and massive, obelisks, hundreds of feet tall. This is an obelisk right here. It's a tall stone statue. Vessels and vases made of stone, bead-laden gold jewelry like this, an enormous temple built in Thebes, and best of all, carved stone sphinxes. Medium, large, and huge, stood guard in front of her temple. So here's a sphinx, here's a sphinx. And this little girl said, what exactly is a sphinx? So she said, a sphinx is a statue of a lion's body, but with a human head. After Hatshepsut died, the beautiful artwork, including the sphinxes, were broken into bits and tossed into a pit. They were buried and left for thousands of years. Amazingly, the museum has one of the sphinxes here, and we're about ready to see it. And this little boy right here says, wow, a real sphinx? And this little girl said, but if everything was destroyed, how did the sphinx get to the museum? So this is a great question. This particular sphinx is in the Museum of Modern Art, not the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And Miss Rayborn has actually been to see it before. I'll share a picture with you later of me getting to see this temple and this sphinx, which is really exciting. So this is a really good question. Egypt is very, very far away, and she shared that these the parts and pieces of all of these artworks were all broken up and smashed and buried in the desert about 1,000 years. So how on earth did it get all the way to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City here in the United States? So that's what we're going to find out. We're going to go step by step and find out how the Sphinx made it to the museum. It says in 1470 BC. So that's a very, very long time ago. We're in 2020, so over 2,000 years plus 1470, over 3,000 years ago. A pharaoh, Hatshepsut, what she said was a female pharaoh, met with her architect. We've been learning about architects to plan her temple in order to collect a collection of statues, including a set of 6 sphinxes. So here they are making a plan. The architect's assistant took down the order and delivered it to the sculptor. So they went to a sculptor who sent his assistant away to the quarry in Aswan to obtain a huge block of granite to bring down the river Nile to Thebes. So she met with her architect and explained what she wanted and her 6 sphinxes. The architect met with the sculptor, the artist, who's going to make them. Then the artist had to send away to get the beautiful, the marble that was used for it. And look at this, they had to transport it on the river all the way down, this huge stone. The Nile River is known for having lots of crocodiles in it. Look at this. Okay, so a lot's happened already. Here is the sculptor working with mallets and chisels, carving the granite sphinx that was ordered by Pharaoh Hatshepsut. So here he is carving away the beginning of the Sphinx. Here they are moving. Look how they're having to move these big stones. Here's all the tools. Hatshepsut was known for having a pet, what? Lion. It was one of the things that she was sort of famous for. So it makes sense that she might want a lion's body with a human head. It represented power to her. It says, here are the Egyptian priests with Hatshepsut admiring the magnificent and brand new granite Sphinx that was sculpted by the sculptor and ordered by the pharaoh. So I think what's going to happen is that we're going to list all the people who were involved in making it. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this is supposed to be the temple that she's having created for herself. Here is Hatshepsut's stepson, Thutmose III, who becomes the pharaoh after she dies. Trying to erase all trace of Hatshepsut, he orders his workmen to hack and to chop and to destroy the statues of sandstone, limestone, and granite, and even the Sphinx that was admired by the Egyptian priests, carved from granite by the sculptor, and ordered by the pharaoh. He left it to be undiscovered for centuries. So the pharaoh after Hatshepsut was her stepson, and he wanted everyone to forget about her. He was very concerned that they remember about him and not about her. So he ordered that her temple be taken down. All of the beautiful statues made for her, look, they're chopping them up, and they dug a big hole in the middle of the desert and they buried them. Here, 3,000 years later, in the 1920s, so that's about 100 years ago, it's 2020, is the archaeologist. An archaeologist is a person who studies remains and bones and artifacts. So here's the archaeologist from New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art. After years of studying books and deciphering hieroglyphics and combing through the hot sand desert, he discovers a pit with broken pieces and dozens of statues, including the Sphinx. So in the 1920s, the archaeologists from the Metropolitan Museum of Art went to Egypt to look for artifacts and learn more about Egypt. They discovered in a big hole in the ground, they dug up lots and lots of bits and pieces of these statues. So it says the Sphinx was dumped there by the stepson, marveled at by the priest, chiseled by the sculptor, and ordered by the pharaoh, Hatshepsut. So they're collecting all of the pieces. Let's see what they do with them. Here is the agent from Egypt's Department of Antiquities, which supervises the ancient site and decides that the Metropolitan Museum will receive several statues, including the Sphinx, that was put together found by the archaeologists, smashed and cracked by the stepson, hailed by the priest, made by the sculptor, and ordered by the pharaoh. So when you find artifacts in another country, you have to work with something called the Department of Antiquities. That means that that country has to certify that you can take that artwork out of the country. So because they worked so hard on the expedition, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is in the United States, was granted several of the Sphinxes. Not all of them, of course. Look, this one says it's going to stay in Cairo. Certain things stayed in Egypt because that was their home, but certain things were shared with the United States and with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So they got approved, and they get to take several of them to the museum. So how does it get there, right? Because this is very far away. It says, here are the art movers who meet the Sphinx when she comes to New York City by boat. They also carefully load and cushion and secure the statue in 13 boxes. So there's 13 pieces in the truck. By avoiding bumpy roads and tight turns, they safely deliver to the museum the Sphinx that was released by the Department of Antiquities, identified by an archaeologist, busted up by the stepson, honored by the priest, created by the sculptor, and ordered by the pharaoh oh so long ago. So here it is. This is what it's supposed to look like inside. Lots of steps that we have to go to. It says, here is the Metropolitan Museum's curator, who knows a lot about ancient Egypt. He can read and write in hieroglyphics. We're going to talk about hieroglyphics right after we read this book. He can tell when a fake when he sees one, usually. That means if something's not a real artifact, he knows how to tell the difference if it's a pretend one. And estimate how old a piece of art is just by looking at it. He plans where to place and how to exhibit the Sphinx that was delivered to New York by the art movers, made available by the Department of Antiquities, right? Egypt had to agree, unearthed by the archaeologist, destroyed and buried by the stepson, celebrated by the priests, created by the sculptor, and ordered by the pharaoh Hatshepsut. So a curator is someone who studies and learns all about one kind of art, like an art historian. And this particular curator studies and learns about art from all over Egypt. Look at all the books that they have that are specifically about different places in Egypt, different kinds of artworks that are created, different stories of different kinds of priests and important people within their religion. So they're learning and planning how they're going to share this piece of artwork with New York City and with America, and how they're going to teach us about it. It says here is the museum's conservators who help the curator put the finishing touch on hundreds of broken fragments and fill them with plaster the many holes and gaps. Back in one piece after 3,000 years is the Sphinx that Hatshepsut. So look at this. This is amazing, you guys. So conservators are people that work for an art museum, and their job is to protect and take care of the artwork. If there's something wrong with it or if it's been damaged in some way, they fix it. So look at all these boxes of the fragile pieces that they had to place back together. They've got all different kinds of special plasters and glues because they had to piece it all back together like one really, really big puzzle. Can you imagine how exciting it must be to be a conservator in a museum and take care of artwork? What a cool job. Miss Rayborn will read this part on the last page because it's a long one. Here are the museum's riggers who operate the heavy equipment needed to haul to the floor the partially restored 7-ton Sphinx. So now that it's partially back together, see how you can see that there's some plaster painting and things here. It's almost all back together, and it weighs 7 tons. That's very heavy. So they have to have special machinery to move it from where the conservators were working on it into the gallery. It has a beautiful platform that it's sitting on, and it's in the American wing of the museum. So we have one more step. I promise I'll read this on the very last one. It says, here is the registrar who notates for the museum's records its newest acquisition, its measurements, weight, date, and origin. Using red oil paint and a teeny tiny brush, he paints the official number 31.3.166 on the Sphinx. That was, they're putting it in the Egyptian collection within the museum. So the registrar is the person who's responsible for organizing and cataloging all of the artwork in the museum. So you can kind of think of them almost like a librarian, right? Who organizes all the books in a library. So look at how many people are involved. We still haven't made it to the end yet. Here is the artist who paints the plaster-filled parts to look like granite, but not exactly. It's important to be able to see which parts are real and which parts have been painted to look real. So look at this. The plaster spots get painted. And the tricky thing about this is an artist has to come in and paint them to look like marble, but it can't look exactly like it because they want people to know the parts that they had to fill in that aren't the real parts. So it says almost ready for public viewing. Look at all the people who are involved. We still haven't made it all the way to the end. She's in the gallery. Look how neat would it be to be able to watch this happen. Here is the photographer who takes the official photographs for the museum's records. She takes some shots from this angle and some from that, some in black and white and some in color of the Sphinx that was, oh my gosh, Look at all these things. Okay, so let's see how many steps that we had to go to. So the photographer is documenting. That's one. So the photographer takes the pictures. The Sphinx that was retouched by the artist, assigned a number by the registrar, hoisted and lowered by the riggers, rebuilt by the conservators, examined by the curator, transported to New York by the art movers, surveyed by Egypt's Department of Antiquities, so Egypt had to allow it to go, discovered in the 1920s by the archaeologist, wrecked and buried by the stepson. I'm already up to 10 different steps of people. Looked at by the Egyptian priests, formed by the sculptor, and ordered by the pharaoh Hatshepsut in ancient Egypt. Wow. It says, here is the docent who loves museums and has read all about Egypt and likes to talk to visitors about the Sphinx that was. I just read all of those to you here a minute ago. And this little girl said, oh, so that's how the Sphinx got to the museum. And at last to be visited by you. So I think it's so interesting to understand when we're looking at examples of artwork from all around the world from thousands of years ago, how we are able to see those things and all of the people that are involved in us being able to see them, one of which was an architect, right? Which we've been talking about. So I hope you enjoyed getting to see all of the things that go into you being able to visit a piece of artwork in a museum. We are going to start our Egyptian unit, which I'm really excited about. So go ahead and head to the next slide and we'll talk about hieroglyphics for today. Bye for now.